Hello everybody, this is RodLab video tutorial number 14. In this video I want to talk a little bit about material specification within RodLab. And as I mentioned in the previous video, in the latest release of RodLab, which is Beta 4.3, we now have the ability for user editing of materials and user adding of materials. And there's some reasons we might want to do this. One reason might be that the Tonkin cane we're typically using for bamboo fly rods today has some variability from column to column. So if we were able to measure some of our strips ahead of time, we could very specifically tailor the dimensions of the rods we're building to get us exactly what we're trying to build, or at least more closely to what we're trying to build. But other reasons are that, there's I think 1,000 is what the internet tells me, different species of bamboo, and there's other species that are good for building rods. So if we can get material specifications for those, we would be able to build rods out of that and quickly develop tapers for that. But even beyond that, there's a lot of other materials people are using to make fly rods. Today, fiberglass and graphite are very common, but in the past there's been a bunch more, and some of them are still built today. I pulled up a page from an old Hardy book here, and you can see there's a bunch of different things that I would have expected. There's some Lancewood round rods, a Green Heart round rod, but something that a little bit surprised me that I wasn't aware of is we have a hexagonal strip-built hickory rod, a hexagonal strip-built Green Heart rod. I'm familiar with hollow steel, I guess, but we got single-built cane, double-built cane, a whole bunch of different variations here. So if we can get these material specs, there's no reason we couldn't build a rod like this again today if we wanted to do so. So in the background here, I've got RodLab up and running, and if I click on my config button, it'll bring up my config window and go to the rod materials area. And this shows me the materials that I currently have installed in the version of RodLab here. And right now, I've only got the base package, which is a Tonkin and a double-built Tonkin. So let's have a quick look at what we're going to need if we want to add our own materials. And the first thing we're going to need is an expression for the modulus of elasticity for the bamboo throughout the culm. And the reason I say that throughout the culm is there's a lot of variability here. If you look at this culm here is a picture from my shop. These outer fibers, which is the very outside edge of the culm, and when I come back to my material config, you can see skin depth in inches. The outside of the culm represents a skin depth of 0. And as I move in, that skin depth increases. And these outer fibers have a lot higher modulus of elasticity than these inner fibers do. And you can kind of tell that by observation, right? We know these to be darker and stiffer compared to these lighter pith fibers. So in addition, the other thing we're going to need to know about our material is we're going to need some expressions for the density. So these outer fibers, again, they're stiffer, but they're also denser than these inner fibers. So I've got some ability to edit this stuff here, and the way I've done this is a little bit confusing. I try to make it as simple and as useful as possible. So what I have is we give modulus of elasticity at skin depth and right at the butt. So the butt would be the closest part of the column to the ground, which would be like the 0-foot point, and this would go into the butt of the rod, and then the modulus of elasticity and the density at the tip. So if you look, this is like the 12-foot point right here. And if inside the program we're trying to get the stiffness, the modulus, and the density at a point in between, we're just going to interpolate between these to find that point. And I think this will give us enough flexibility to do what we want without requiring a math degree to add different types of bamboo into the program. So a few things that are also important here. If you look, we've got a default material checkbox. The only thing this is going to do is when you're adding a new fly rod, like copying and pasting or something like that, the default material is just a material that'll come up every time. It doesn't have, you can change that when you're adding a new rod. But the thing that is a little more important, you'll notice the apply culm rounding to material. So Tonkin, any type of bamboo, we've obviously got this rounding, and that's going to have a culm rounding effect, which is going to change a little bit of the cross-sectional stiffness. So we should do check the apply culm rounding to material for any material we've added that has a circular shape. One thing that we don't have here is I haven't put any other material types. So another way we can add a material, we could copy an existing material and edit these factors, or we could import one from files. So if we do this, I mentioned in the previous video, there's an export files directory. So all of these materials here are materials that I currently have some XML export files out there for. I didn't include balsa, but I created balsa just for the heck of it, so let's go ahead and import balsa. Now if you look, I can create a rod with balsa. I don't think anyone's going to do that because all those planes I had as a kid flew into a tree and got broken. We wouldn't want that. Another way, before we do any editing here, let's just get out here real quick. Another way we might actually get a material specification into RodLab would be to open a taper. So whenever you create and save a taper, all of the material specifications are embedded in that taper. So let's open, I've got a green heart taper here. So when I bring this and open it, I didn't have green heart material configured, so now it's added it. It tells me that it's added a green heart material. So if I come back to my RodLab, let's go ahead and go back to config, and you see I open this up. Now I've got a material specification for green heart. So let's close that back up, and just for the fun of it, let's go ahead and calculate this rod. This is the same rod I think that I calculated in the previous video, but now instead of green heart, let's make it out of balsa. So calculate new rod. As you can see, not surprisingly, balsa isn't very stiff, so it takes a lot bigger cross section, but because this cross section is so light, the density is so minimal that I get a lot lower weight out of balsa. But that's not particularly interesting, so one thing that I can do is, let's get out of here, come back to my config. I don't really want balsa in there, so let's select that and go ahead and delete the material. But let's show you right now. Let's go back to green heart, and the reason I'm going back to green heart is I'm going to add another material. I'm going to add a lancewood, and because it's a material that we're going to use a very simple cross section for, meaning that there's not going to be a change in modulus of elasticity in my skin depth, I'm going to compare it very close to green heart. So let's go ahead and come in here to the wood database, and I've already got lancewood up, and you see they were kind enough to give us my elastic modulus, and it's already in pound force per inches squared, which is effectively psi. So it's 2.9 mpsi. So let's come back here to my configuration, and I'm going to copy green heart. So let's do a copy as new material. So now I've got a green heart copy. Let's rename that, and let's call it lancewood. So let's come back real quick. As I mentioned, 2.9 mpsi, so 3.57. Greenwood's very stiff, so 2.9. I'm going to just go ahead and copy and paste this over all of these, and as you can see, as that I'm making these changes, the graph below is following me. Oops. Here we are. And now I need to get the density for this. So I've got the density in a different number here. Where was it? Here we go. 61 pounds per feet cubed. So I really want ounces per inches squared. So I've already put this in Google, and by the magic of Google, I've already got a number. So 0.565 would be about right. There we are. And same thing, we're just gonna copy and paste this throughout. And there we are. I now have a version of lancewood, and I'm not gonna apply column rounding to lancewood. I'm assuming a lancewood is going to be made out of a board, so there's not going to be any rounding effect here that's going to change the dimensions that I get. It'll start with a flat surface. So I'm not going to check that. I'm not going to make it default. But the one thing I am going to do right off the bat, I've already put this into the program, and there's a possibility that you would lose your configuration. So I'm just going to immediately go ahead and export this material to file. Say OK, and now if I go back to my import, you'll see I have this lancewood rod material export. And let's get out of here. So that's a quick way, an easy way that you can add a new material in. And we could obviously do the same. I've already got expressions for fiberglass, and these should be included in your RodLab install. They will already be in the export files, I believe. So there's a couple different ones: E fiberglass, electrical fiberglass, and then S fiberglass, a little different spec. So let's get out of here real quick. I'm going to show you one possible thing to watch out for. And what could trip you up a little bit would be that materials are referenced, I'll say, by material name. So one possibility that could happen would be you could create a material and somebody else could create another material and name it the same way, but that material would have different specifications because you got your material specs from a different website or a different source. So let's open taper translation. And I've already created a rod like this. I'll call it a problem rod. So say, for example, my friend sent me this green heart rod, and it's got a different green heart spec. So when I open it, it's going to come up and I'm going to get this complaint. And it's going to tell me, warning, the material from the loaded taper has a different modulus of elasticity and a different density. So 7.5 and 5.5% different. So watch real quick. If I come in here, if I go ahead, new rod, if I go ahead and calculate the new rod, you'll notice that my new rod is right on top of my old rod, as you would expect if they were identical, but the new heart rod says green heart. Well, the green heart is copied from the existing taper. So if I come in here and reselect green heart, now it's going to use my version of green heart. And you see when I do that, I get a little different taper. If I come back and recopy the source rod, now I've got the source rod version of green heart, I get the same one again. Now, the only reason I'm bringing this up, it's a possible problem. There's a couple different ways you could deal with this. You could take your naming of green heart, you could change the name, and when you open that taper, it would bring in green heart with the name green heart, and your green heart would be named differently. That might not be helpful because you might already have tapers that were named green heart and they used your green heart spec, so you would have the same problem but now with your tapers. So the other way you could deal with that is, I mentioned before, you can manually edit taper files, although I never had a reason to do it. Well, here's a reason to do it. So we can open this with Notepad, and I could come down here, let's do a quick search for green, find green heart, that's the model name, and when I get down here, here's the material name, green heart. So what I could do, I could come in here and I could edit it, say I got this green heart from Jeff. So I'm going to go ahead and call the material green heart Jeff instead of green heart. Change nothing else, save it. And now when I come back in here, let's open the source taper, open the same one, green heart mod, and now it's going to tell me green heart Jeff not found, adding green heart Jeff. So now I've got two versions of green heart that are a little bit different, but the nice thing about this is I'm not going to get that warning and I'm not going to have the confusion with two different versions of green heart. So I think that's where I'm going to end it here. I know there's probably still a lot more questions people have about material, so why don't you shoot those to me and I can hopefully do a better job of explaining what kind of things you might be interested in doing. So hope this is helpful, and thank everybody for listening.